This is the Keith Jackson Jakob Heinemann Quartet performing last week in Madison, Wisconsin on the opening night of the tour that is bringing them this coming Sunday to Mars Landing Arts Center in Mars Hill. Heinemann is a double bassist and Jackson a reed player who found each other in a fertile Chicago jazz scene and bonded over an appreciation of each other's compositions and love of improvisation. I'm Matt Peiken of See Here. Heinemann spoke with me last week from Madison a few hours before their show. In this conversation, he talks about his roots in the avant-garde jazz of Chicago, the art of composing for specific musicians, the array of experimental music he's involved with, and the new music the quartet will perform in Mars Hill. Jakob Heinemann, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. So you're talking to me from Madison, Wisconsin, aren't you?
Yeah, you got it.
I must be psychic. I saw that you're starting your tour there today. It seems like you've bounced around from a variety of groups to what you're doing now. Tell me about this quartet. It was a trio, now it's a quartet. Tell me about the genesis of the trio to begin with.
For sure, yeah. Well, it all started in Chicago. I lived in Chicago from 2017 to 2022 about. And so Adam and Keith and I would cross paths intermittently. I played in a couple of Adam's groups. I played with Keith a couple times. They played together in separate contexts. And it was after the pandemic that we came together as a trio to play at the Hungry Brain, I believe was our first performance. And we just felt like aesthetically we jived. I think we're all interested in like a wide range of jazz and improvised music, European jazz from the 60s and 70s, the Dutch improvised music scene is important for all of us, and just the great history of the music. So playing a wide variety of tunes, original compositions that we wrote for the group, as well as music that other composers had written, like John Chikai, Bobby Bradford, Henry Threadgill, people like that.
You mentioned that you all came out of the same scene. And does it stem from like just showing up at jams together, all, or seeing each other out in your own different groups and just having conversations? How does it get to be where these disparate musicians who are part of this giant scene in Chicago, how did you guys latch on to each other? I mean, I know you're involved with a lot of different groups, but how did you latch on to thinking, oh, we want to write music together?
Right. That's a really good question. I feel like the answer will be different depending on who you ask. Chicago is a very big place for sure, but the jazz and improvised music scene, there's like these hubs where everyone is passing through. One of them is definitely the Hungry Brain, the great venue on the north side of town. They have a Sunday improvised music series curated by Josh Berman and Mike Reed. It's been running for over 20 years. So when I first moved to town, that's where you go. You go to the Hungry Brain on Sundays, and same with Adam. And so I saw Keith play there, I saw Adam play there, and I was like, yeah, I like these guys. I like how they play. And when I started to book my own gigs, you keep that in mind, who you hear, who you like, and put a pin in it, like, oh yeah, that person might be a good collaborator in the future. And then an opportunity came up. I think it was Keith's gig, and he just decided to put the group together. So yeah, I'd say like about jam sessions in the more improvised music, kind of avant-garde community, it's less about jam sessions. I'd say that's more of a common meeting place for people who are interested in playing like bebop and more straight ahead jazz.
That's really interesting to me because you would think on the surface, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that improv would lend itself to jams in a way where you can just start a
You
rhythm
can just play.
and
Right.
just play. Why do you think groups that do more free jazz and improv don't come out of the jam scene?
Yeah, I feel like not all of us go to straight ahead jazz jams. I did when I first moved to town. I come from a straight ahead jazz background. That's what I studied in college, and I love playing that music. But I don't know if Adam did, for example. He also comes from a jazz background, but it's a different practice. It's about knowing a common repertoire, knowing jazz standards, playing a very specific style over those standards. Not everyone is interested in really engaging that necessarily. And like you said, as improvisers, anyone can play with anyone. So I think there's an attitude of you're interested in playing with someone, let's just book a show. There's plenty of places to play in Chicago. And why not just get together for an evening performance or just get together for a session at someone's practice space?
Yeah.
Just kind of play.
So you guys get together, and when you got together, did you already have compositions of your own and Keith have his own compositions? You brought them in to just see how they would work, or did you just start improvising together?
We started off playing pieces, and I think Keith had a lot of stuff that he brought in at first. It was his own compositions as well as transcriptions from these older musicians that we all adore. And the pieces we played back then that we continue to play, they're from kind of like deep cuts. It's like we play pieces by like John Chakai, who people may know from, he lived in New York in like the 60s and collaborated with some of the early free jazz community there. But he's Danish, so he spent most of his career in Denmark, and just a really interesting composer, really interesting saxophone player. And you don't hear his compositions so much. People don't play them. They're a little bit more obscure, but they're really beautiful. So Keith had like a few of his tunes, and we were all really excited to play that because it's not super commonly done. And then I think we played some of Adam's stuff that he had already written for like other groups. And I always write for specific groups, like just how I work as a composer. I really like to write for specific people. So after we played a few times, I wrote some tunes for this band
So
specifically.
when you're writing for this specific group, what are the characteristics you're looking to accentuate and amplify that are
Mm,
specific to this trio that you wouldn't have necessarily with compositions for other people? So what traits are you looking to bring out and how do you do that in your compositions?
That's a really great question. I would say for me as a composer, I always start with a sound that I have in my head, or in my ears that kind of just comes to me, or I am envisioning how I want the music to sound. And so for this trio, I think about the sound of Keith and Adam. Keith has this really big tenor sound, powerful lead sort of tenor. So like how I want to write a melody that for that sound, that I could hear Keith playing that would fit with his approach to the horn. And Adam is a very multifaceted drummer. He's often playing polyrhythms. He's playing lots of different sounds and colors at the same time. So I have that in my mind as well. How can I write a piece that's going to put Adam in a position where he can just express himself and do his thing, and it's really going to serve the music. So sometimes I think about being a composer for improvisers as being like a basketball coach or something. I'm like obsessed with the NBA. So it's like,
Oh, are you?
sometimes the best coaches, they may not even have the best players, but they know how to put the players in a position that's going to accentuate their strengths and de-emphasize their weaknesses, right? And then if guys are in the right situation, they can just blossom. And so I feel like as a composer, I try to do that and put my collaborators in a position where they're going to just be able to express themselves and really thrive in the music.
So how do you do that? You specifically, so you're talking about how Adam is a very versatile drummer, deft with polyrhythms. Do you then just leave a lot of open space in the music, or do you compose in odd time signatures that kind of compels him to be polyrhythmic? How do you do that as the coach, to use your metaphor, when you're composing, to leave that open court open for these
Yeah.
players to then do what they do best?
I feel like for Adam, I want to leave him space to do his thing. So I don't want to give him too many instructions. Like I want to leave it open so he can really just go wherever he wants to with the music. And I think that's going to make it a special sort of situation for him. So like I'll give you one example. A new tune I wrote for this tour is called Strange Train. It's influenced by early jazz, like from the 20s. And we were playing around with it a little bit and trying to figure out what was the right drum groove. We tried maybe he could play like a more straight ahead kind of 20s swing style, but we settled on we're going to play the melody, me and the horn players straight. And Adam's going to, during the melody, he's going to play out of time and just do his own thing. So it's two things happening at once. And that
Oh,
juxtaposition is really interesting to me.
so
So
the
that's an example.
So are you saying so the polyrhythm in some sense is created by all of you together because
Yeah,
you're
for sure.
so it's not just he is playing in a polyrhythm. You are playing in a certain rhythm. Keith is playing in that rhythm. You guys are playing together
Yes.
and he is counterpointing that in a different
Yes.
rhythm. Adam is. That's really interesting because when I was listening to the record Stinger, what jumped out to me, and it's a composed record, there's lots of improvisation in there, but there are foundations of composition, if I'm
Yeah.
correct, or tell me that. But what is composed seems very patternistic, like there are patterns you're doing
Mm.
that. I don't imagine you're composing long charts of music. It's more that, okay, we're going to do this pattern that encompasses 8 bars, for instance.
Sure.
And we're going to go 8 bars in this recurring pattern and then improvise over the top of that. And then we're going to have this transition to this other pattern. Am I correct in
Mm.
how I perceive what you're doing, or am I totally off base?
No, I think that's an interesting way to put it. The way I would put it is a lot of the music for this band were interested in providing a jumping off point for the improvising. So, I mean, like I compose contemporary classical music, right? And so that's a completely different frame of mind where every little thing is written out and there's very little improvising. But this is almost the opposite situation where you're like setting up the structures that we can play in. You know what I mean? It's like you're building like playground equipment or something. And you want to build it like really intentionally so that it's like a really cool kind of unique thing that people hear and it's like, oh wow, that's like I get it. It's like it's very rhythmic or has a certain harmonic color to it. But we don't want to fill it in completely. We want to leave it open so that we can play within that and improvise within that. So you're talking about patterns. I think about it more like textures or colors that we're sort of
Ah,
establishing with these pieces. And then we're improvising within that. And it can go different places depending on how we're feeling.
yeah. Does Keith also compose with that same mindset? And do you hear a lot of similarity between your compositions, or do you have your
Right.
distinguishing traits that you think the average listener, once they get to know you two, can pick out the differences?
That's an interesting question. I definitely can tell the difference for sure.
I would hope you could.
Yeah. Or even if I feel like I can point, like I know Keith's, we've collaborated a lot. So like I could hear a saxophone player on the radio. I would know if it was him or not. Or if I heard a composition just on the radio, I would know if it
Really,
was his
you
or not.
you can hear, you can pick his playing out just by
Yeah.
sound. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Because like I said, Keith comes from, I would say like the generation of Chicago improvisers immediately prior to mine. So these are people who moved to Chicago in the late 90s and early 2000s. And what I really love about this sort of group of musicians is that they all have such a specific and unique sound just on their instruments. Josh Berman, the great cornet player, is another example. His sound on the cornet, just him playing one note, you can tell it's him right away. And that's what I love about all my favorite musicians. My favorite jazz musician slash musician of all time is probably Lester Young. And you can tell right away that is Lester. And I think great musicians have that really individual characteristic approach to their sound.
there's a lot I want to ask you based on what you're telling me, but let's focus more on this quartet that you're bringing here. You've
Yeah.
added Andre Royston to the group. The record you made was as a trio. How did you collectively, as your trio, think we want another voice to join us on this tour? And tell me about Andre and what he brings to this music.
Yeah, totally. First of all, his real name is Andreas Roysum. The Andre Royston is a pseudonym that we use for visa purposes because he's traveling
Is that why
internationally.
there's quotes on the
Yes.
name that I see in the
Yeah,
okay?
this is a common practice among kind of jazz, avant jazz musicians when people are traveling internationally because the cost of artist visas is extremely high.
That's amazing.
But yeah.
So okay, well, good to know.
But
That's
anyway, yeah, Andreas he's from Norway and he's awesome. And he's a new collaborator. He's someone who has been to Chicago a couple times. He was in Chicago last year to play at the Sound of Gravity Festival, which is a new festival curated by Mike Reed. And he played with the great Marvin Tate, who's an awesome spoken word poet. And they made a record together. So he has some sort of connections with the Chicago scene. And that's where Keith met him last year. And they just stayed in touch. And Keith and Adam and we put out Stinger last year and we were getting together and like, what should we do next year? And Keith kind of threw out the idea of adding Andreas, and we checked him out and thought he'd be a great fit. So we've been rehearsing this week, and it's been a pretty seamless integration into the group. So I'm really excited.
what has that done to the music that was already composed for a trio and performed and recorded by a trio? How does this change things when to the music itself and just to the performance, the four of you together? How has that changed the language that you have together on stage and the signals you send each other about, where you're going with your improvisations?
That's a great question. I've written some new material specifically for the quartet now. Compositionally, it's another voice to play with as a composer. It's fun for me to write harmony, counterpoint. There's now four voices that I can use as a composer to juxtapose or play with or against one another. So that's exciting. And then improvisationally, Andreas, getting to play with him the last couple of days, I can tell he shares like a wide ranging approach to just improvising. He can play what sounds like a jazz solo over chord changes. He can play extended technique, more sound based textural stuff. He can play anything in between. And so that gives us a lot of flexibility as a group to collectively move to different zones. So, yeah, it's like adding another voice to the collective.
You yourself perform in such a variety and compose for such a variety of settings and bands. I noticed you have a newer record out with another group called Lines of Flight,
Oh,
which
yeah.
which is really interesting because a lot of it's based on found sound. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a trio. It's a free improvisation group. So there's no compositions. But one of our members, Norm Long, is a wonderful sound artist and improviser who's also based in Chicago. And he works really extensively with field recordings. I could talk about Norman for a long time. He's a really big inspiration for me. He uses field recordings to document the changing landscape of his neighborhood where he lives on the south side of Chicago. It's a kind of a post-industrial landscape that had a lot of environmental problems, and they've been slowly transitioning it into a park. And so he uses field recording to document that process and just as a sound material to work with.
Wow. I imagine your experience working in free jazz and improv isn't so much different working with other musicians as it is working with found sound to some degree. It sounds like it's a postcard of Chicago, of his neighborhood. How did you,
Yeah,
how did you see the double bass playing into those recordings?
it was really a natural fit for me because I work a lot with field recordings. I'm just very interested in environmental sound. I think it's really fascinating to think about the soundscapes that we inhabit in our local communities, the different soundscapes that we encounter in our travels, natural soundscapes that have very little human involvement. I just love listening to all of these different sounds, and I use them pretty extensively in my compositions. Like I'll write for a chamber ensemble and have an electronics track that has field recordings and stuff, and I use them as an improviser as well in
Wow.
my own solo music. So it was a very natural fit to have Norman come in and use those field recordings. He manipulates them quite extensively with various synthesizers and processing. So he's very flexible. I think about improvising a lot as like working with the raw materials of sound and trying to shape them in accordance with how the musical moment is shifting. So in that sense, it's really no different whether you're playing the bass or playing field recordings. You're engaging with that process of working with sound in a fundamental way.
Obviously, from our conversation, beyond performing and recording extensively as a musician, you're also a very active composer. Tell me about your life as a composer and the way you've composed for a variety of groups. And I was actually a little surprised and impressed that you're also composing contemporary classical music. Is this on commission? Are orchestras commissioning you, or is this something you're composing on your own and then trying to find groups to perform them?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix. I've never written for orchestra before, and so that's maybe a later career achievement that I would look forward to is getting like commissioned by like an orchestra or something. Right now, it's the same as it is with writing for improvisers. It's making music with my friends and colleagues, people I know personally, getting together and collaborating. But instead of collaborating as improvisers, we're collaborating as composers or composer performers where we're writing chamber music for one another, which is a process I really like. It kind of varies from project to project how it actually the music comes about. I've done a couple commissions, but a lot of it's more like a collective sort of process.
I just had an image in my head when you were saying you compose with friends, and I'm imagining kind of like a musician's jam, but a composer's jam, where you're all getting together with charted music and
Yeah,
you feeling each other out that way. I wanted to ask you before I let you go, is there
thank you.
anything about this coming program at Mars Landing Arts Center that
Yeah.
you want people to know about that we haven't talked about yet?
I just say it's an exciting tour for us because we're playing a lot of new material. So I have six new pieces that I wrote for this group that we're playing on the road. And then there's another couple that Keith and Andreas have written. And we're also playing some new stuff that is not on the record that we've played before. There'll be a lot of new music. I'm really excited about how things have been sounding in rehearsal. There's a lot of different sounds and styles that you'll hear. There's some free improvisation, there's some straight up swinging jazz, there's some more creative grooves and other approaches to playing together, and we like to blend it all together. So I'm really excited.
Well, we're really excited to have you here. Thank you so much for taking this time to talk with me today and tell me about your life in music. And we'll see you when you get here. Have a great opening show to your tour tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, thanks for talking with me.
All right,
Looking
take
forward
care.
to
I'll
it.
talk to you later. Thanks so much to Jakob Heinemann for today's conversation. If you haven't already, please subscribe for free to our newsletter so you can see and hear what's happening in Western North Carolina arts and culture. Just go to seehearwnc.com. I'm Matt Peiken, and I'll see you at See Here.